Hi, my name is Sean Baker, and I am a ministry consultant with Thrive Ministries, formerly known as Pastor Church Resources. And I was asked to address you today um, to talk about your role leading advisory committees at Synod. And I think the reason I was asked is because for the last few years, I have been helping congregations and classes across our denomination uh, have difficult conversations together and make decisions on contentious issues. First, with Challenging Conversations Toolkit, which some of you might be familiar with, which was a resource designed to help congregations read and engage with the Human Sexuality Report, a report that addressed topics that many congregations had no practice talking about and which threatened to be a challenging topic to bring up. And then since Synod 2022, I've been helping congregations trying to assess where they stand in the CRC landscape, how they're going to proceed in light of decisions made by Synod. And all of these are difficult issues to address. What almost all the churches that I'm dealing with have in common is something that I think Synod also has in common, which is that, at least for the sort of headline issues of Synod, there are no apparent political solutions that permit us to stay together just exactly as we were before. Something's going to change. Something's got to give. I think there's a widespread sense of that. I'm still open to the Lord surprising us. But there is this sense that I have, I think probably others have too, that there will, to some degree or another, be people who feel like they come out of Synod feeling like winners, and some who feel like they've come out feeling like losers. And whenever you come to a point where you realize that, where you sense, oh boy, we do not have a political solution here that's really a win-win for everybody, it's a really good time to start paying attention to process. Yes, there will be people who feel like they lost. But can we conduct ourselves in the way that we make decisions with such integrity that no one could accuse us of manipulating the process or picking favorites or allowing any of our biases to skew what is meant to be a deliberative, discerning process? Now, I'm not naive. I am well aware from my experience working with churches that you can do everything in your power to have a fair process. And there are some people who, at the end of the day, for them, the only fair process is a process that results in you agreeing with them. And I think we should just be realistic about that. That's true, that some people are in that space. It's true that no matter what we do at Synod, somebody is going to accuse us of tipping the scales or manipulation. The question is, can we rise above that? Can we be above reproach in the way that we conduct ourselves? Even knowing that there will be people who criticize us, can we lean into this Christ-like leadership that expects there might be suffering along the way and say, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing, even if people might not appreciate the way that I do it or question my motives? Will I still strive to do the right thing in terms of process? So today, what I want to do is I want to share with you a framework and then some 6 tools for better process for how to make decisions, how to talk about things in contentious situations in a way that I hope and I expect mitigates complaints about process. So I want to start with a framework. So you can see I've got these 4 quadrants up on the screen. This is what I will often share with a council that I'm consulting with, where there's some tension in the air. They're having to make a challenging decision or deal with a contentious issue. And when that happens, we see leaders responding in kind of one of 4 categories generally. So I want to depict those with these quadrants. So the y-axis up and down is talking about how much a leader thinks of their job in response to a challenging situation. their job is to challenge their people. It's to be firm with their people. It's to be like a steady voice, to hold up high expectations, to live into your convictions, to keep people accountable, to focus on outcomes. Okay, so that's the y-axis is measuring how high you are in focusing on challenge or firmness as a leader. The x-axis, going left to right, is looking at how much you focus as a leader on being fair with your people. This is how much your focus as a leader in these tense moments is on relationships and keeping people feeling a sense of togetherness, focusing on good process and how to make sure everyone feels included. Okay, so those are the two axes we're working with. Now, if you are high in challenge and low in support, we call that the authoritarian box. Although folks who kind of occupy that box or who default to that, they typically won't call themselves authoritarian. You're more likely in a church setting to hear them describe themselves as prophetic. And really their orientation is very much toward the truth. They see themselves as responsible to uphold the truth on behalf of the community. If they have a kind of a motto, it might be, our job is not to tell people what they want to hear. Our job is to tell people what they need to hear. So those are folks who are high in challenge and maybe low in support. All right, if you are high in support but low in challenge, so you're focusing on relationships but less on outcomes, we might say that you are in the permissive box. But again, folks in this box will basically never describe themselves as permissive. You're more likely to hear these folks in church settings describe themselves as pastoral, okay? As much as the authoritarian talks about the importance of truth, you'll hear folks in this quadrant talking a lot about the importance of grace. If these folks kind of had a motto, it might be something like, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. All right, now, if you are low in challenge and low in support, we call that the neglectful box. I sometimes joke that it's the CRC council box. This is the box that says, oh, council's going to change over in 2 months. Why don't we let the next council deal with this contentious issue? So these are folks who are always looking for, something difficult comes up and they're looking for a rug to sweep it under. Some reason why they can delay or postpone. Now, we sometimes represent these four quadrants with prepositions. So the authoritarian tends to do things to people. The permissive person tends to do things for people. And the neglectful person tends not to do things. And I think all of us basically have a default mode that we fall into as individuals and leaders. Like, I'm a parent of 3 small children. I sometimes say that with my boys, I tend to be authoritarian. And with my daughter, I tend to be permissive. This is just kind of the default way that I parent. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. It's just the way that I show up in spaces. I think when I was a pastor, I probably tended toward being more permissive, and I could have used a little bit more challenge with my congregation. All right. But of course, you can tell, because of the way I've laid this out, that I don't want you to be in the 2, not, or 4 box most of the time. I want you to be in that upper right golden box. You know, it's the right box because it's a different color. All right. So this is the with box, or we sometimes call it the restorative box. This is the box that says you don't have to compromise, that you can be prophetic and pastoral, that you can hold grace and truth, that you can be firm in your convictions and fair and compassionate with your people. Folks in this quadrant are authoritative without being authoritarian. Folks in this box move forward. They have an endpoint they're able to get to, but they are able to get there together. When I think about Synod coming up, and especially related to the questions about discipline and human sexuality, I've been thinking about, the leaders who tend toward the authoritarian box or the prophetic box. What is maybe their big fear at Synod? Coming into Synod. And I'm guessing that the big fear is that we might be so process-oriented. We're going to spend so much time talking, deliberating, listening, that we're never going to get to a decisive outcome. They also might fear that we're going to overlook really substantial issues for the sake of a kind of false peace. So they tend to see the permissive folks as kind of naive leaders whose sort of relationship preserving compromises are going to lead to greater compromises down the road that will even threaten the integrity of the church. So that's probably where the authoritarians are afraid going into synod. The folks in the permissive quadrant, they probably are tending to fear that we're going to become so results oriented. We're going to be so focused on getting the right answer that we're going to lose sight of the people in the community, and we're going to cause harm. They fear that the line between being prophetic and the line between pharisaical is a really thin line. And so the question that's kind of lurking beneath all of this for me and for you as we approach synod is, are the stakes so high that I really need to sacrifice, like acting graciously, in order to ensure the truth? Like, are the demands of this moment so much that, you know what, we can't afford to be nice, if you will, because we have to win. The truth must win. And likewise, on the other end, I think maybe folks are wondering, are the stakes so high that if I make a stand, if I'm decisive with respect to a truth claim, are we going to lose our hold of grace as a community? These are the questions that I think we wrestle with. And what I want to do in the next few minutes that we have together is think together about how we can move up and to the right. Okay, so again, everybody has their sort of default tendency. At our best, I think we're all restorative, but especially when we get anxious, we tend to move to the left or we tend to move down. What are some practices that we might incorporate, even as advisory committee leaders, to help move our people and ourselves up and to the right, so we're not compromising either grace or truth? So let me offer to you a few resources that I think could be helpful. So the first thing that I'd say is explicitly name your expectations. In the handout that's attached to this video, I have these listed under letter A. I've got kind of a sample list of expectations. You'd probably want to adapt that in some way that suits your group. But what I like about naming expectations is that it sets a tone. So like a few of the expectations there listed on the document that I really like is like number 3. We seek grace and truth. That's an expectation that you as the chair can set for the committee. We seek grace and truth. We sometimes say in our consulting work that without truth, we're not going to go anywhere. We're just going to spin our wheels if we don't have traction with truth. Without truth, we won't go anywhere. Without grace, we won't go anywhere together, right? We might be going somewhere, but we're going to be leaving all kinds of people behind. We want both. We want to go somewhere and we want to go somewhere together. Name it. If that's what you hope for your group, that it's both a grace and truth group, name that expectation. Another one that I think is really an important one that we use a lot in our work with congregations is number 8. We may disagree with one another even strongly, but we will not question the sincerity of each other's faith in God or each other's love of either Scripture or the church, right? Let's not question each other's motives, right? Once we get into that, once we try mind reading other people's motives, the conversation devolves very quickly. Let's not question each other's faith. There's plenty to disagree about without questioning people's faith or their love of God or Scripture. So don't do that. That tends to corrode the community very quickly. And then the third thing that I'll mention is, are there other virtues, or this is number 12, are there other virtues or fruit of the Spirit you particularly hope that we will exhibit in our time together? And what I like about that is you're inviting the group to think about, how do we want to show up together? Maybe folks are showing up in your advisory committee and they're afraid. Maybe they're not afraid. Maybe they're gearing up for battle. You're asking them to reflect, how do they want to be in this space? How do they want to show up? Do they want this to look and feel like a battlefield? Or do they want this to look and feel like a prayer meeting, right? they can help invite them to contribute to setting the tone and establishing expectations. So there's lots of great reasons to do this I've got listed here. One that we'll actually talk about later is when you explicitly name expectations early, then you sort of create a standard against which behavior can be more easily assessed and improved in the future. So if somebody is not treating others graciously, you can say, hey, we said we were going to be grace and truth. So I appreciate how you're bringing the truth here, but it seems to be separated from grace. Can you say that differently, right? You've named that expectation. It makes it easier to refer people to that later. All right. Use a talking piece. So I am a big fan of talking pieces. I've got my little wooden sheep here from Children's Church that I like to use as a talking piece. A talking piece can be any physical object, preferably nothing sharp, but something that's easily passed around the room. And a talking piece is a really simple idea, but it's powerful. So it's simple in that really the whole thing can be explained this way. Whoever has the talking piece in their hand is invited to speak. And then critically, everybody else in the room is invited to listen. And the idea is, in a typical meeting, you might name a question that you want everybody to engage with, and then you pass the talking piece to your left. And every person gets a chance to speak to the question, and they're done when they pass the talking piece. And it gives people space to answer questions more thoroughly. What I like about a talking piece is it's invitational. It's a way to say, we want you here. Your voice matters. You know, in any of these advisory committees, I imagine that there are some people who assume, some delegates who assume that nobody really wants to hear what they have to say about anything. And likewise, there will be some people who tend to assume that everybody wants to hear everything that they're thinking all the time. Passing a talking piece can be a way to kind of regulate the conversation in the group, to lift up voices that tend to be a little bit quieter, and frankly, to quiet the voices that tend to be a little bit louder. A talking piece has a way of calming down an anxious group. It slows people down and puts the focus on listening. You know, one of the things I often say is that listening to someone does not mean agreeing with them. But there's this great quote from a theologian, Augsburger is his name, and he says something like, being heard by someone feels so much like being loved by someone that for most people, they can't tell the difference. You know, we're heading into territory where we're going to really need to lean into that upper right quadrant. And for every time that we lean into that truth aspect, we got to also find ways to lean into the grace aspect. And I think a talking piece is a way to lean into that grace without sacrificing our decision-making authority. Let's listen to each other. Let's listen to each other well. This is what a talking piece can do. So again, what I like about a talking piece, it has you focusing on listening, not interrupting each other. Every voice is heard and taken seriously. You know, one of the things that I'll just own for myself, when I was in a council meeting as pastor, sometimes I would only listen to others in the room long enough to sort of formulate my sort of killer response. I wasn't listening to like hear their complete argument. I was listening just long enough to sort of get the leverage I needed to win the argument from my perspective. And so I listened just long enough for them to say that, and then I waited until they took a breath, and then I jumped in with my sort of devastating counter argument. And of course, that doesn't do much to build trust in the room, right? So instead of letting the conversation flow freely, where like people might be interrupting each other or cutting each other off, a talking piece kind of slows people down and helps us all to focus on the task of listening, which is so important for the deliberative process. All right, when might you use a talking piece? One of the places I like to use a talking piece is at the beginning of any kind of big session. So I've got an example there in the handout, a letter A or letter C, activities that you could do at the beginning of a session to help orient the group to what we're doing together. One of the questions I'll often ask is just, hey, what's one word to describe how you're showing up this morning? And, it can be a silly thing, but like all your people are going to be sleeping in dorms, right? I think without air conditioning. So maybe somebody says, you know what? I'm tired. I didn't sleep last night. You know what? It's kind of helpful to know that before you spend, 12 hours in intense deliberation together, to know that, oh, like Johnny is tired. Or maybe Jill says, you know what? I got a call from home that something in our small business is like, there's a serious problem. And so my mind is elsewhere. Again, all that does is it reorients you to the humanity of one another and helps you to maybe deal with one another more graciously if folks seem a little bit off that day. Another time to use a talking piece is just any time when you're sensing as a chair, I really want input from everybody in the group. Maybe there's an imbalance in participation. One person is speaking more than a lot of other people, and you say, no, I want to get a read as the chair on where everybody in the room is at. The talking piece can help you to do that. And then the other place that I like to do this, I've got a couple of activities listed there, letters B and G in the handout. Checking out at the end of a session, leaving 20 or 30 minutes for folks to reflect on their time together. Again, can be just a really helpful way to reorient the group to the fact that this is a group project. This is not a battlefield to win arguments. This is a place to discern God's will together, even if there might be sharp disagreement. All right. I want to give you one specific example of a check-in that you can do that I think just helps to orient us to each other as human beings. So I'm going to show a video here. This is from the Colossian Forum, a group that does work trying to get people to have these kinds of difficult conversations.
Whenever we face difficult, pressured questions, we face fear. These questions are pressured because there's a lot at stake and there's a lot that can go wrong. And when we're afraid, we're prone to bad behavior because we become angry and defensive, self-protective, or withdrawn. And so fear works against our best intentions to be loving, truthful, and to care for others besides ourselves. I once met with a church leader who was worried about the way their team was handling a pressured situation. There was an urgency to make this quick decision, to take a stand and to issue a statement, and others were resistant to those moves. And so relationships among the team were strained to the breaking point. So we suggested they take some time to talk together about their fears, to go around the circle and ask, so what's at stake for you in this? What do you think is going to go wrong, and what outcome are you afraid of? And what they found, and what we find often, is that when we name our fears, a number of good things happen. Sometimes the things we're afraid of lose their teeth when they're spoken out loud. It isn't really as bad as we imagined. And sometimes we discover that others share the same fears. When we name our fears, we also discover things that we love, because behind every fear is something that we love that feels vulnerable, something we want to protect, something we don't want to lose. Most of the time, the vulnerable loves we're trying to protect are really wonderful things, so it can be illuminating to look behind our fears and find these lovely things. Here's an example. In many Christian disagreements, it can feel like the Bible is at stake. If we choose this particular path, some will see it as ignoring something the Bible clearly says. And so if we follow that course, we're going to lose the Bible. And it can be helpful then to look behind that fear, so then we find out, oh, we really treasure the Bible. This is God's revelation, our guide for faith and practice, a great gift given to us by God. Our fear of losing the Bible points us to how important the Bible really is. So when we name that fear and the love behind it, we quickly realize that nobody in the argument wants to lose the Bible. Some might feel the vulnerability and risk more than others, or some might see that one path puts the Bible at risk in ways that the other side doesn't see. But the love is shared. neither side wants to lose the Bible. So by naming that fear and that love, we quickly realize that in a very deep sense, we're all on the same side. And once we realize that we all want to hold on to the Bible, the argument changes. We can ask, so help me understand how your approach honors the Bible as the gift it is. And so once we discover our shared loves, our ability to ask these really important questions and to work together grows.
So what we'll do is we'll show this video. You can show that video if you want to your advisory committee. And then we ask just a couple questions, passing the talking piece. Very briefly, have people say, what are you concerned or anxious about related to our committee or your participation in it? What do you fear could go wrong? Again, this is just a very kind of human way to relate to one another. It's a move to the right, if you will. And then in the same go around, just have them say their fear and then also their love. What do you deeply value that you want to protect? What you're doing is you're orienting people to a sense that we are all in this together. One of the things I like about this exercise is it inevitably surfaces that tension that we were talking about earlier with the quadrants, the sort of grace and truth polarity, right? This fear that people have that they're going to be asked to sacrifice one or the other for expedience sake or to get along. And just naming that helps orient us all to the sense that we are in this together, that if we are going to be grace and truth leaders, we need to do this together. So that's a great sort of check-in exercise with your group. All right, we're almost done here. So a couple of weeks ago, I helped to convene a gathering of pastors. 12 pastors, we were in a retreat setting, and everybody who was there, they represented the sort of full range of views in the CRC on the human sexuality issues. And we were inviting them to actually come into a setting where they would lean into having a difficult conversation with each other, not trying to convince each other exactly, but trying to help each other see what concerns they had about each other's positions. It was a pretty fraught setting, and I think I was pretty nervous about it, but it went quite well. And one of the pastors at the end was reflecting on this. This was a pastor with pretty traditional outlook on these issues, but the pastor said, you know, as she was reflecting on the discussion up to this point, and she said, you know, as we got into these issues, it became clear to me that all of us have a kind of limp when it comes to these issues. That is, like, all of us pastors have wrestled and struggled with this. This is not an abstraction to us. We bear the wounds of trying to deal faithfully with these issues in our settings. And she said, you know, as we talked with one another about the issues, it became clear where people's pain points were. What were the things that are sources of grief or even despair for people? And she said, you know, I had this sense that if we wanted to, these pain points, or she called them limps, you could exploit those for the sake of the argument. You could manipulate that weakness to give your side an advantage in the argument. But she said what was so refreshing is that she experienced in that retreat setting, people not kicking each other as they limped, but almost propping each other up. Even people who disagreed with each other, and they would help each other along, recognizing the woundedness that we all carried in this. So a few practical ways that this showed up is in that setting, and I think what you can do in your groups is you can ask, you know, are the concerns of each side or all sides being articulated as well as possible? You know, frankly, some people are just much more articulate than others. Some people are much more comfortable in this setting than others. Will you exploit someone's unfamiliarity or lack of ability to articulate for the advantage of your side? Or could you love that person by, I don't know, asking a follow-up question or trying to say back to them what you think they're saying to help make sure that their concerns are articulated as well as possible? Could you do that, even if you disagreed with them, because you love them? And would that require too much of a sacrifice in terms of your decision-making authority or the truth? Can you help them strongman their argument? Another thing that she pointed out was one way to help people with their limp is to help everyone be at the same level of understanding procedure, right? So there are some people in the room who they don't have nearly as good a grasp of sort of what's happening here or what the consequences of this or that are. You can use your relative advantage in knowledge of the system as a personal advantage, or you can serve even those you disagree with by making sure that they understand as well or better than you do what's happening at this point in time. And then finally, one of the things that's become really clear to me in this process, especially when we're talking about the human sexuality issues or the discipline issues, there is a grief process that is happening for people, I think, across the denomination. As I think more and more folks have this sense dawning on them that, like I said earlier, there may not be any political solution that allows us to stay together the way that we were. And we're starting to anticipate these losses, things that we really love that are going to be gone or changed, maybe in ways that are permanent. One of the things to be wise about as a leader of your committee is that there are people in a grieving process in your committee. And just as with a pastor, when you get critical feedback from someone who just lost a loved one and they're complaining about your sermon, you know that they're not really complaining about your sermon. I mean, maybe your sermon needed some work, but the grief is talking. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but as a pastor or as a leader, that does help you to relate to that person differently. So just be aware that in the room, there are people limping with grief. Are you going to take advantage of that, or are you going to shore them up? And finally, the last activity I think that really helps, this is cribbing Church Order Article 36, mutual censure, in which office bearers assess and encourage each other in the performance of their duties. One of the things I like about naming expectations early is that it allows you to then assess how people are doing after the fact. So as a checkout exercise, ask your people, how did you think we did at exhibiting the virtues and following the norms that we named earlier? Or another one that we've used in a number of settings, what I couldn't share. And what we do here is we pass out a note card to everybody in the room. And we have them write a number 1 to 10 on the card. A 10 means I felt entirely safe to share whatever I felt like needed to be shared. And 1 means I held back. You collect the cards, and then you as a facilitator or the recorder, whoever, calculates the average score in the room, 6.8, whatever. Now, the reason we do this is because it makes people in the room aware that not everybody experiences the room as you do. Some people feel more comfortable in it. Some people feel less comfortable with it. The only score we've never gotten in one of these exercises is like the same score from everybody. There's always a range, and it just makes people aware, oh yeah, we're not all coming at this the same level of comfort or the same level of safety. This is invaluable information for you as a chair because it can help you to try to create a safer space, but it's also invaluable in this. One of the things we've seen in groups that do this is maybe they'll get kind of a low score. And what will happen the next time they meet is somebody who put down maybe a higher score will say, I have strong feelings about the issues we're talking about, but I was really sad that some of you clearly feel less safe to share. And even though I disagree with you, or I think I disagree with you, I really need to hear from you. We need each other for this discernment and deliberation. So please don't hold back. Now, it's one thing for the chairperson to say that to the group. It's another thing for one of your peers in the group to say it. So this exercise kind of creates a space where that conversation is possible. And then the last thing that we do, this is an activity, it's the last one listed in your handout, a praise, lament, and hope prayer. where you invite people to reflect on the sum of the day and where do we see God, where we want to give thanks, what do we want to lament or grieve, and what is our hope for the future. And what I like about this exercise, one, it reminds us that all of our deliberations are conducted before the face of God. So that's always a win. But also, as a chair, this gives you invaluable feedback on how things are going in the room. It provides a space for people to grieve, right? There will no doubt be hard things named. There will be people feeling like they're losing something, even live in the meeting. Give people a space to bring that before God. But there will also be ways that God delights you and surprises you. Let's name that, put our hope in that. And then finally, in the hope prayers, one of the cool things that I've seen, even in fairly grim and from a human perspective, hopeless circles or meetings, is people end that prayer by putting their confidence and their hope in the Lord Jesus Christ, that it is his church. And it's such a powerful testimony when you see people do that. So anyway, these are the 6 exercises and the framework I wanted to share with you. I hope this is helpful to you. Again, you've been selected for your positions because you've already demonstrated real capacity at facilitating. But I just wanted to share with you some of the resources that have been helpful for us in Pastor Church Resources, now Thrive Ministries, as we help serve churches dealing with complex and difficult topics.